Welcome to Field Notes from Abroad, intersectional conversations centering around intellectual property, communicating across differences, and well-being as professionals living and working around the globe. I'm Laura Gisler, a U.S. patent attorney. I've lived and worked as an attorney in Sweden, Copenhagen, and now the U.S. Hey guys, welcome to Field Notes from Abroad. Today I have a special guest, one of my former colleagues when I was working at Volvo Cars, George Pappas. George, welcome to the show.
Nice to see you again. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for making this early recording time work. Just so everyone knows, it's 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning. I really appreciate this, George. George, actually, would you mind introducing yourself just briefly, where you're at now and what you're up to? And then I'm going to dive into how we know each other professionally, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm George Pappas. I am currently based in Chicago. I work for a company called International Motors. We are part of the company called Traton that includes Scania, MAN, and Volkswagen Trucks. And their part, the whole group, is part of Volkswagen Group. Specifically, International Motors makes trucks, the international trucks that you may see on the road. We have, I think, about 20% of the U.S. market for trucks. I'm senior counsel, corporate and IP counsel. I handle privacy, other than IP, of course. I handle the telematics, autonomous vehicle, ADAS, that kind of domain for the whole Traton group. And I handle privacy issues, AI, and I'm kind of in charge of the vehicle data strategy for the group.
Awesome. Thank you, George. And one of the reasons, George, that I wanted to have you on here is because when we met, it was back in, was it 2018, I think? And somewhat recently, you had just moved over to Volvo Cars into Sweden, and I was just landing there as well. And I just remember being so blown away by the wealth of knowledge that you already had and that you were bringing to our department and to our day-to-day work. And I was coming just out of doing almost exclusively patent work at IBM and had been doing almost, was doing a lot of drafting and prosecution, and then had been kind of in the background of some licensing deals, but really didn't have much of a sense of the business side of things, or certainly not as much as I would like to. And I was and I just remember being so kind of floored and felt like I was so incredibly lucky to have landed in this place where Ray, our former boss, had just moved into a chief IP role maybe like 6 or 8 months before. And then he was doing really focused on maturing, I think, the IP department, or really bringing into a more tech-forward version. And so then to have landed there with, I guess, you and him, I felt like I was able to learn so much in such a relatively short period of time. And also, one shout out to Sweden, since that is where we met. It's Swedish National Day today.
Really?
So,
wow.
Happy National Day to the Swedes listening.
Happy National Day to all Swedish colleagues.
Exactly. But George, anything that you're willing to share about that time and that role for you? Because I can only imagine, sorry, I'm asking you a question and I'm going to keep talking, but I can only imagine you stepping into a role after having been already like a VP at Qualcomm, which we'll get into the earlier days of your career, but which with such sophistication, with a company that's basically inventing patent licensing for the rest of us, and then to move into a company that was advanced in so many ways, but I think in the IP department at Volvo Cars was going through so much change and so much redirection as they really focused on being more of a global company in their IP perspective and more of a tech company. Okay, go ahead, please. Anything you'd like to share about that time?
Actually, it was just a coincidence. The Ray, who I went to law school with at GW, uh, uh, and was at the time looking to bring in somebody to Volvo that had either a Qualcomm or Nokia background, because the whole company was being transitioning from essentially a mechanical company, traditional car company, into a mobility company, an e-mobility, where everything was becoming the connected car was now essentially a smartphone. And they were running into all these assertions. I think we were getting a couple of assertions a week from telecom companies and wireless companies and semiconductor companies. And so there were just so many assertions that they just didn't know how to deal with them. And so that was one thing. And then the portfolio was transitioning from like brakes and gears and to now we're moving into trying to do the earlier stage of the electric vehicle. So there are a lot of battery stuff and more towards my stuff into some of the ADAS functionality, that assisted driving functionality, the early telematics, the mobility, the infotainment system. And as you're getting into and then obviously you need a 2G, 3G, 4G functionality. On top of that, you needed Wi-Fi, you needed Bluetooth, all that functionality. And so it was like, well, how do we deal with this? We don't have the patent attorneys or the sophistication to deal on the legal side with all of that. And so I had we were talking to Ray about the role, and it just so happened at the same time I had read an article that some recommendation was being made that car companies should look to hire former Qualcomm, Nokia, Ericsson people, and so I ended up joining Volvo, and it was an exciting time because Ray had more of a CS background, not so much that deeper electrical telecom background that was needed for the role. So he relied on me to kind of make recommendations and kind of had me lead the assertion effort and the litigation effort that was going on at that time. So that was really exciting. And then obviously work. And then we had so much work. Very quickly we ended up bringing you on board, and then everything was data sharing and all the telematics issues and all the software issues we were running into with new apps and all of that. So you were one of the most pleasant people that I had ever a pleasure to work with, and you were a sponge. I mean, just the fact that you could absorb all this information that everybody was throwing at you from the legal side, from the technical side, even though it wasn't your core technology background. And so it was fun to mentor somebody, you and others, but specifically you, in areas that were outside your normal domain, but you just loved being we both loved being in a foreign country. For one, it was fun doing that for a little while,
Especially the summers.
especially the summers. The winters were rough. We're talking 5 hours of daylight. That part of it was hard. But yeah, so we felt like we were essentially adding a lot of value. I know I did.
Yeah.
I felt like as a team, we were adding a lot of value. We were not just a cost center to Volvo. We were actually adding a lot of value. We were helping them turn innovation into real value with developing their portfolios. And how we did that required strategy. And we would talk about strategy. We would come together. Do it this way. Don't do it this way. We'd be doing it this way, for so many years. And that's why we think it doesn't work. We should change that. We need new counsel. Here's why this counsel, would be better for this technology than what we've used in the past. And so there's a lot of discussion around that, but there was always an understanding of where we were going, and everybody agreed with the strategy. And as a team, everybody just came together so nicely. So that was such an exciting part of my career looking back.
Thank you so much for all of that. And I think just to zoom in a little bit on what you were saying at the beginning, I think now even though it's only been 8 years, I think we take for granted that, of course, all of these elements would be integrated into a vehicle. But at that time, it was still most of the technology had been added, but it was added fairly ad hoc. I think they were all looking for, that was when autonomous drive was maybe going to be the next thing. So maybe we're going to have fully electric vehicles that were fully autonomous. And I know there are companies who are still working on that, but I think it took a very different trajectory than what was expected. And so instead of instead of being able to kind of like scrap this piecemeal combination of technologies, we found that we actually needed to kind of work with all of them, but somehow make them more cohesive, because we kind of reach beyond a point where slapping a few different technologies together and making basically like coding them so they all work together made sense. We had kind of a Frankenstein's monster, it felt like, but we needed something that was cohesive but still could work in the kind of like the old world, or the world that we were actually living in. It couldn't be so forward thinking. And so I think that was in hindsight, a really interesting time to get to jump into this specific world. And I think your work, as you were working both as, like you were saying, like a senior advisor, but also when it came down to, okay, so who's going to draft these agreements? It was like, oh, also you. So you were like doing both advisory work and a lot of the actual work. Of course, we did have senior counsel, but like you said, that was also, I think, yeah, such a dynamic time, because we knew a lot of change needed to take place, but also we were the foreigners coming into a new environment. And so we, I think, had very strong opinions about what needed to be done. But then also, at least for me, it was such a big time of learning, and I think even probably more learning in hindsight, of how much of the human element is so relevant to successfully getting the work done, that it was like I could feel like I was right about something, for very niche example, in patent drafting with one of our external counsel, right? Um, but they had been working with the client for far longer than I had, and so even though I was the client, I was still the new one. And so I think I'm not sure that I would navigate those differently, but I think I didn't understand as much how many layers of both cultural sensitivity and like professional like history or institutional knowledge were present in the environment that we were stepping in. And I don't think that was unique to Volvo or to Sweden or to our particular time. I think that's something um, that is very often present in in a lot of companies when you're the new person coming in, especially to make change. Have you seen that in other roles, either before or after Volvo Cars? Because you didn't seem as
Yeah,
shocked by it as I did.
yeah, no, I'm experiencing that now because now, having moved into International Motors, as a truck company, they're slower in adopting these technologies than cars are. So they're probably a couple of years behind the industry
Okay.
with autonomous. So uh, and so now I stepped into a role with a very small legal department where I'm handling the vehicle data strategy and some of the 4G, 5G kind of issues that might come up, and the ADAS and all of that beautiful stuff, and licensing, and with dealing with suppliers and downstream customers. But the interesting thing is that at the end of the day, what is similar, right, is that moving into the department and getting them to understand that legal is not a cost center when it comes to IP, right? IP is a completely different beast. We're more a combination of entrepreneur, techies,
Yeah.
and at the same time, also lawyers that are trying to prevent something bad from happening, but also trying to make sure that, on the one hand, something doesn't just stay a trade secret and nothing becomes
Right.
of it, right? So you're not making, and at the other end, you're not publishing it, right? And lose that value. So you got to
Yeah.
find that mainstream. You're either publishing it or keeping it as a trade secret, but you're adding value to it, but you're doing it strategically. And so
Yeah.
that's where the entrepreneur comes in. And that concept of doing it in a strategic way, right? In the ways that people have done for 20, 30, 40 years now in the telecom space, and bringing in those best practices. And there are some really, really wrong ways of doing things. There's a proper way to draft a claim and a wrong way to draft a claim from a litigation or licensing perspective. And unfortunately, the mentoring and training is not there today the way it was for the way, we sat down and did some of our, multi-hour discussions about claim drafting. A lot of law schools aren't teaching claim drafting because they're not specialized in patents. Patent agents are not taught patent drafting.
Yep.
They're focused on formalities and procedures rather than the actual legal, the more important part of the business. And so that value add part is what makes it fun. And I'm going through that process right now where people are realizing that what I'm bringing to the table is revenue generation and value add, not just being a lawyer to field problems.
Yeah.
And that is both a good thing and a bad thing, obviously.
Yeah. And thank you for highlighting that, because I think that internally as IP counsel at companies that are actually trying to do something, so not, I don't know, that's probably all IP counsel. It sounds a little condescending, but I think that you are, at least for me, I feel like I'm constantly finding that balance internally of like risk mitigation, like not risk elimination. So risk mitigation. So probably for me, like in the lawyer side of my brain, pushing the level of risk tolerance that I feel comfortable with a little bit, while also balancing out, this entrepreneurial pro innovation, like let's make something happen. And we're the ones who can really help facilitate some of those deals. Internally, I see that as something that I'm working with. And then I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how you've seen it work versus not work in terms of communicating that externally, because I think it is a fairly like you were mentioning, I think it's a fairly foreign concept for a lot of folks, but I think it really is what IP counsel can do for you. We don't just come in and say, like, flag a bunch of issues, although that is part of it, flagging some issues, but then also like driving solutions or helping co-create solutions is, and I think for a lot of folks in at least more traditional companies, I've found there's almost like, not like it's breaking anyone's brain, but I think there is an in. I don't think it's an unwillingness. I feel like it's a more complicated messaging than I would have expected. I'm always a little bit shocked by how much effort it takes for me to communicate that, right? Because usually I am sitting under in the legal team somehow, or maybe sitting with the tech side and usually trying to do both, but in the corporate structure hierarchy, hopefully only reporting to one. I think we've seen reporting to CTOs and GC, and that does work for some structures, but not having two direct bosses is never
Yeah.
something I've aspired to. Okay, sorry. So the question was, you got it.
Yeah.
Like, how
So
do you
I think what you're
communicate
saying, it's hard. You just have to do your job and do your best, and
that?
it's really, sometimes you'll just fall on deaf ears.
Yeah.
To give you an example, after I left Qualcomm around 2009 timeframe, 2010, I started a practice. Eventually, I moved that practice to Greece, and I was the only patent attorney in all of Greece.
Okay.
Right, and really, there were 67 or 70 research centers or universities patenting nothing. They were spending billions and billions in dollars, and I was trying, I spent years trying to get them to patent and try to create patent pools. And I met with prime ministers all the way down to tech transfer officers at these research centers. Couldn't convince anybody that patents were important. To this day, they had some European patent attorneys that were attorneys that got grandfathered in when the EPO system went into effect. They were not really technical. They were just lawyers. Eventually, most of them have passed away. I think they got 5 left now that they're still alive, who aren't even practicing. So that's a whole country that doesn't have any patent attorneys to support a population of 10 million. You have Bulgaria, Romania, Italy. We're talking about 90% of Europe has no patent, no sophistication in IP. And then you saw what we dealt with at in Europe, where they have a lot of sophistication on the technical side, no sophistication, a lot of sophistication on the prosecution side, but they don't tie that into licensing and litigation. So imagine if the IP, if the IP managers who are responsible for IP at universities, research centers, big corporations, at the highest levels aren't patenting and they're doing much less of it, or they're doing more of it but lesser quality, don't appreciate the value, how one person can have that much of an influence impacting things. And so, yeah, that is one of the most stressful part of our jobs. And sometimes you do feel unappreciated for the value we bring in. And, and that's the downside to big, going into this field. There are days you're going to feel like you're on top of the world. You've added a lot of value. And there are days where that whole, it's going to come crashing down on you. And you'll complain, for example, that you got too much work because you've just developed this patent portfolio over here and it's wonderful, and you've invested, the client loves you, and you worked 80 hours a week for 2 years and you've done this, but you're also handling that other portfolio that you've invested all this time. And the manager will be, oh, you're working too hard. We'll just hire, Noah, and Noah will take this over for you. Like, like it's just so easy. We'll just anybody
Yeah.
can just do what you just did for the last
Yeah.
2 years, and not like, hey, you will bring in Noah. You'll oversee me all for a little while and see if until he gets a grasp of what you've done. And
Yeah.
no, it's just he'll take it over just to and that nuance that you bring as an expert and that as an entrepreneur, more like you are an entrepreneur,
No.
right? And that because 99% of businesses fail. So to be a successful entrepreneur is a nuanced skill. And same thing with building a patent portfolio and doing it correctly. And that skill set is something that is unique. Not everybody can do it and do it well and enjoy doing it along the way.
So,
And most managers, when you end up in a company that does it well, oftentimes will just say, hey, this is great. Thank you. Go over there and we'll give this to somebody new we'll hire with, 3 years out of law school or something.
Yeah.
And that's also the downside of, but that's just the realities of corporate life.
Business. Yeah, exactly. Thank you for sharing all of that. And I wonder if, as you were speaking, I was wondering if AI will maybe even help with this, because I think now literally anyone can write a patent, right? And I wonder if that will bring to light like the value of this like nuanced the precision and expertise that has been developed over years, overseeing hundreds or thousands of patent applications and understanding also their role in litigation, like seeing the whole life cycle, seeing the various I guess hurdles that they can run into, and being able to bring that to day one of patent drafting, of the inventor interviews. So I'm just a thought. I was wondering, I think in some ways, go ahead. Your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so definitely, AI is the future. It's going to be a great tool. The problem is the role of the attorney is changing from drafting the application to being the IP strategist. I mean, you have to know what the IP strategy is. You have to tell the machine. You have to tell the tool what the strategy is, what the scope, what the inventive concepts are, what you wanted to draft. And once you can get the strategy right, then it'll know how to do its job, and it'll do it better than humans can do it, because it's got access to billions and billions of patents. And humans can't do what machines can do at the end of the day when it comes to drafting. And we'll never be able to match it, and certainly not from a cost efficiency standpoint.
Yeah.
However, it takes years and years and years of writing patents and being mentored and maybe being exposed to some licensing litigation to really understand strategy.
Yeah.
So if you're just, thrown into a law firm instead, use tools and start writing, or if you're a patent agent, you've just passed the exams and you're not thrown into a law firm where you're like, use the AI tools and start drafting, you write what look like beautiful applications. Okay, but they're not litigation worthy. They're not. They're from a licensing standpoint, you may be missing some targets from a licensing standpoint because you didn't understand the competitive landscape that needed then how it matches the claims, and then how the claims needed to be, how the specification needed to be written and the description in order to match the claims for it to be licensing worthy, not much less litigation worthy.
Yeah.
And that takes potentially even me. I mean, I'm still learning. And
Yeah.
as we evolved into new technologies, so we went from, when I started, it was, there was no software. So we went to software where it was punch cards. And so you go from software, then you went into internet. Then there was like semiconductors that, you with semiconductors like 100,000, 50,000 transistors on a chip that was the size of your nail, and now we're to 50 billion transistors on the same size, the size of your nail. So the evolution is just
Yeah.
it's earth shattering. And how do you keep up with that? Those advances in technology, it's difficult. And so what's more difficult is the law keeping up with the advances in technology. And so you're writing a patent application not knowing where the law is going.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
have to, the more of a strategist you are, the more experience you have, the more training and mentoring you have, you can better guesstimate where the law how it might end up.
Yeah.
And so you can do a better job looking forward into that. But without that training, without that exposure, AI is not going to help you. It needs guidance when it's drafting the application. So people that are relying, 100% on these tools are not going to end up with, really strong patents in the end.
Yeah. Nice. Thank you for all of those insights. And I think you made a really good case for the value of mentorship. I think it is like upfront, it does slow things down a little bit, right? But I think especially in the patent world, and like you were saying, like the patent strategy world, I see it as invaluable to maintaining even the integrity of our profession, much less and of course the value add too. But speaking of mentorship, you haven't known everything all the time, forever. Can you take us back to the start? George, you grew up in New York City, part-time, Greece part-time, right? Or was it
My my
tell me.
parents were my parents were divorced when I was 3 years old,
Okay.
and I was raised with my father and relatives in Greece. So
Okay.
until the age of 10.
Okay.
And that's so my formative years were all Greece. My first language was Greek.
Okay.
So Greece is I'm Greek at heart. I picked up a lot of Greek mannerisms, and I interrupt people all the time when I speak. I get really excited about conversations and want to jump into the conversation, and people take that the wrong way sometimes. But that's just very much a Greek thing, where you just rather. And so from there, when I was 10, we moved back to the States. I grew up in New York City, Astoria, Queens. And just having gotten that early foundation in math, engineering was kind of like the obvious thing to go into college. So, yeah, became an engineer and
Electrical
along
engineer, right?
electrical engineer. Yeah, electrical and computer engineering. And then that eventually somehow I ended up in the patent office and
Okay.
became a patent examiner. And I was one of the first patent examiners examining software cases.
Cool.
And so that was definitely the hardest job I ever had. I had I had a boss who didn't believe, as SEP, the supervising patent examiner, who didn't believe anything was patentable in the software. So he refused to sign anything, to put his name on any patent that was software related. So he's like, go find it. And this was before database searches. How do you, it was impossible. It was the most difficult job I had. I had like a 90% rejection rate. I hated my job. And so when law firm, and then eventually I was going to law school at night at GW, and eventually the law firm said, come work for us. So I joined a big downtown law firm and was doing prosecution in more so semiconductor stuff, semiconductor physics stuff. So I got into that technology space and some software stuff, but not too much, mostly semiconductor physics and hardware cases. And and those were my formative years. And went to school at University of Buffalo and for engineering.
Nice.
Um, did a little bit of my MBA and then jumped into law school. And then from there, I had a lot of family in Chicago, so my goal was to move back to Chicago.
Cool.
I have 5 brothers and sisters, and Yeah, I have three brothers, all in the military,
Ugh.
all in the military. Very, and so I was the only one that didn't end up in the military. Thankfully, I probably wouldn't have fit in. Too
We're
liberal.
we're glad for that.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, tooth. And so, yeah, and so those are my formative years. And after that, somehow I ended up at Motorola, and that segued into Qualcomm, and then that's how my telecom career took off and became essentially a telecom patent guy.
Nice. Thank you for all of that. Can you tell us a little bit about night school law school? Because I think that is a fairly common thing in some law schools. But I think for a lot of folks in just like more traditional law schools, I think you would never expect that. Or I think they feel pretty overwhelmed just by law school itself. So the fact that you're working full time or part time, and
I was
then
working full
also
time.
you're working full time and then going to law school at night. And that was in DC?
Yeah, make sure
Yeah.
you pick a law school that isn't going to ding you for missing classes.
Yeah.
So that because you miss a lot of classes when you're working full time,
Yeah.
particularly in yeah, if you're supporting litigation or have deadlines, you're going to miss classes. So at GW's many a days where the professor would be like, Mr. Pappas, can you tell us what Roe versus Wade is about? And you're like, pass. He'd go to the next patent attorney next to me. He'd be pass. And then by the eighth patent guy in the class in torts,
Yeah.
he just like, okay, I'll tell you what Roe versus Wade's about. And that's what night school is like.
Mm,
On the other hand, once he told us about the case, because none of us had time to read it,
mm,
right? The discussion was extremely stimulating
yeah.
and interesting because we were all pretty much in our late 20s. We had guys in their 30s and 40s. A lot of depth, a lot of people had come to it with a lot of personal experiences
Yeah.
and they shared those experiences. And as a couple of times when we had larger classes and there were much younger people in the class, it seemed like some of the younger people losed out on the opportunity. If they'd waited 10 years to go to law school, they probably would have
Mm.
gotten more out of law school, I felt. So
Okay.
if anybody's, that was my experience. I think
Yeah.
going, not necessarily the part-time thing, but waiting until later. But part-time is good, if not better, because you're in there with older people.
Mm.
People that, but even if you're in your 30s or if you're surrounded by people, who are 19, um, you, I think the classroom, the way it's taught, probably takes on a different dimension, because a lot of students just don't have those life experiences that you need for some of the maturity and sophistication that at certain discussions
Yeah.
that take place in law school. And certainly when you talk about patents, there's a lot of experiences and you have to actually draft cases or a lot and one third of the class was probably patent examiners at night school at the time. And so a lot of us have brought our personal experiences to not so much from a technology standpoint, from a legal standpoint.
Yeah.
We took patent licensing, we took trade secrets, cases on trade secrets, litigation. So it was a lot of depth, even though it was 40, was it 1990? Yeah, I'm dating myself here, but yeah, it was
Yeah.
35 years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah,
Hmm.
but and it was one
Very
of
cool.
the yeah, it was a very strong IP program. It was one of the first in the country, and we were very lucky to have been part of that.
Yeah, very cool. And to be getting to experience law school already through like this patent lens that you already had established. That's yeah, really powerful. Um so then tell me, so then Motorola, Qualcomm, those aren't small steps. Anything about those years that you'd like to share or for folks maybe who are coming out of more traditional law school, how do you land those jobs? Or how did you decide, maybe not how do you land those jobs, but how do you decide that those were your next steps? Because I think a lot of times there's this sense of the options are endless and therefore overwhelming. And also, I don't have 10 offers on the table right now. I have to put in quite a lot of work in order to get somebody to even like care about my resume. And I think I've in conversations that I've had with mentees, or other folks kind of looking for their first big step. Maybe they've done some summaring places in the patent world, or done some pro bono work. But they were looking for that first big step. And I think there's this space between, yeah, what I was saying, like overwhelmed by all the potential entry points, and then also realizing there's so much work that might need to go into getting your resume in front of a place that you would actually want to work. Any advice there? Which I know you already had some experience, so it's a little bit different. But I know you, yeah, I feel like you've seen so many different roles.
Yeah, I think the world's changing from when I started in terms of what they're looking for. I think it took 40, 50 hours to write a patent back then, and you were doing it. It was done differently. Obviously, the approach, technology was there. The data, you had to search it. It took 10 hours to search. It took 10 hours to draft the claims. It took 20 hours to write the patent application. There was maybe discussion with the partner if you're in a law firm, back and forth. He would tear it up. You'd rewrite them, and this exercise would go on for days. And so, by the time you're done writing the application, you'd put in 60 hours. That's how things were done. Now, that level of quality and sophistication and mentoring, isn't as common. So, and the other thing, you have AI tools that are really spitting out applications in hours instead of 40 hours. And so it's a new reality. Patent agents are taking a more active role. It's a good and bad to it. Like I said, many patents do provide a defensive role, so that's sufficient from a defensive posture. But from a value add, you need a different approach, and that value add is diminishing. So that's why you're seeing, more resistance by IP to hire, experienced IP lawyers, or to train. To bring in younger lawyers, to hire experienced lawyer and bring in younger lawyers and say, hey, invest in them. Let's mentor them, and let's get a quality portfolio that can generate revenue from us, downstream. So because of that, you're seeing fewer and fewer opportunities. You're seeing law firms now go to AI tools and generating thousands of applications where they used to generate hundreds. Their bottom lines, they're increasing their bottom lines by doing volume versus focusing on the higher quality margins of applications, or focusing that top 10% of clients they're willing to pay $50,000 to $25,000 an application. You're seeing much less of that. And so if you feel like the law firm is not the right setting for you, either because it's not a good training ground, or it's not the training ground you need, or you feel like you're more entrepreneurial minded. Okay. Yeah. But you like IP, you like going to patents, but the problem is the world has changed. So corporations don't want to do a lot of patent drafting in-house, right? Yeah. They want to use law firms. They want to use these law firms that have the tools, they've got specialty. Maybe they're working with, associates in India, or someplace like that where they can really spit them out quickly and do a very good job. And so you need to bring something else. You need additional skill sets. Got to bring privacy, cybersecurity, AI. And so what I would recommend there is take the time, get certifications from like CIPP or CPI, I don't know much. There's different certifications there. Totally. Yeah. And get those certifications. Right? Invest a couple $100, maybe up to $1,000 for each certification. Invest the time, a week or two, to just focus and take the test, get the certification. Or even if you don't take the certification because you don't want to spend the money on taking the test, take the classes. Coursera has all the classes pretty much, for almost nothing, to be able to take the classes, whether or not you go through the process of getting certified. At least you can put in your resume that you've taken those courses. Yeah. Okay, and you feel like you're skilled and expert enough to undertake work on privacy, on AI, on cybersecurity, because the role of an AI counsel isn't just IP; it's IP at corporate. Yeah. Right. If you can't do both, right, you're almost not you're not as valuable anymore. Yeah. You're really limiting to the corporate world. Yeah. You're limiting yourself because the world has changed. People don't want strict intellectual property prep and process attorneys in-house. Yeah.
Yeah.
anymore. They
Yeah.
want multi-disciplined, multi-legally disciplined professionals, and that means your IP skills are valued less, but some of these other skills are valued more. So you need to bring the whole skill set to the table.
George, that's really great advice. Thank you. So a lot more, it sounds like self-direction and getting kind of a lay of the land and getting a little bit more breadth in addition to the depth. But I think for the depth piece though, I'm wondering, I know you're saying like if somebody does want to be in-house and on the patent side, I feel that I have no idea how I would have navigated portfolio management had I not personally drafted so many patent applications before I jumped into that role. Would you advise that, or do you think that that's just a luxury that hopefully you can have because I don't understand how you could manage. I mean, I'm sure you could, right? But I think speaking from my own personal experience, I don't know how I would have um, successfully managed outside counsel and built a portfolio with any level of strategy without having like direct experience of what drafting and prosecution look like. Or yeah,
Yeah,
question. Do you think it's
I,
necessary?
I still think that a good starting ground are law firms, IP law firms, so patent
Mm.
prosecution. I mean, to
Yeah.
jump into a corporate role and expect that you're going to get trained in a corporate law. I mean, it happens. We did it, right?
Yeah.
But it's not the typical scenario.
Yeah. Okay.
And so, unless they have a revenue generation mindset,
Yeah.
like an IBM or a Qualcomm or a Nokia, they're probably not going to invest in new hires to write a patent application
Yeah.
the way it should.
Yeah.
I don't. I just don't. Most companies just see it as a cost center. So if you know you're applying to a company, or if this is what you want to do and you believe in-house is for you, and you want to write applications and then evolve, eventually you can evolve into other things whether you like it or not. It's just the nature of being an in-house attorney.
Yeah.
But if that's the route you want to take, focus on companies that see patents as a revenue generator
Mm.
and
Yeah.
not just a cost center.
Nice.
And you know we all know who those companies are.
Yep.
You know,
Great. Yep.
how much money are they raising for their portfolios? Are they monetizing? Are they selling them? Are they enforcing their patents? If they are, they're the ones that have that mindset.
Hmm. Great. What about finding good mentorship? I know that's such a wide and broad question, and I feel like I've proactively sought out mentorship in so many different ways, and also in some ways, like at Volvo and working with you, I feel like just landed. Was lucky to land. I mean, maybe looked around a little bit, but was lucky to land in places where I was surrounded by people who were not only so much more knowledgeable than me, but also so generous with their time. I think that is just with increasing stress and constraints, and but also probably fairly uniform across the legal field. That is fairly rare. I've run into so many generous people, and at the same time, I think the default or stereotype is still that most senior counsel don't really have much time for folks who don't know as much. Has that been your experience, or how? Yeah, tell me.
I think most people want to talk about themselves and want to share their knowledge,
Mm,
both their personal and their professional.
okay.
So if people sought out intern positions that don't exist and just said, you know, I'd like to join your patent department. I don't need to get paid.
Yeah.
I just would like experience to be mentored by. I'll do anything that the IP department. I'll move files around.
Yeah.
I'll do anything, right? And then, but I have a law degree or I'm in law school. I have an engineering degree in this domain. This is what you guys are working on. I think it could be of value. I don't need to get paid for 2 months in the summertime. I just want to see how the department works, and I want to see if this is right for me after I come out of law school. You'll probably have a job coming out,
Yeah.
okay, because you're showing that kind of ambition and incentive.
Yeah.
And you're probably going to find that at least one of the patent attorneys is going to be all too happy to mentor you.
Awesome. Great. That's really good advice. And even as you're saying that, I'm remembering, oh yeah, at the end of my time at IBM, I was really looking to get out of patent patent prep and process, or not really get out of it, but really trying to expand my horizons. I was like, okay, I see what this is. I haven't mastered it, but I get what I need to do here. And I remember having so many people were so generous to connect me with different departments within IBM because it was so big, and letting me just basically do a bunch of free legal work for them. But through that, I was doing my actual job too. But then finding people who were, like you said, there are people who are willing to teach you, but a great way to do that is by making yourself a bit valuable to them, or at least trying to make it more of an equal exchange of labor. Like, hey, I know you'd love to help me, but I also know that you're so incredibly busy. So let me handle some of this low level work for you, and in exchange, be able to like tag along on some of these meetings or get into some of these conversations that I otherwise have no business being in. So yeah,
Actually,
thank you.
some of the best patent attorneys I know are people that worked as engineers in companies, were looking to do something different, and somehow they ended up as patent specialists, moved out to
Okay.
become patent agents, and eventually moved out to become patent attorneys in the companies that they started out as engineers.
Yeah.
There's just like
Cool.
this isn't for me. This engineering thing isn't for me.
Yeah.
I've always thought about going to law school, and maybe I should, then they start going to law school, or before they decide to go to law school, they transition over to the patent department and start out as patent specialists, where maybe they're doing prior art searches. The next thing they know, they're now, senior partners at law firms, or they're, running IP departments.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think like you said, it allows you to be so much more entrepreneurial, and I think that's like a common that's a common thread amongst so many of the colleagues that I meet. I think that's what gives me so much energy working in the IP, and specifically like patent IP space, is that you find these people who, yeah, have started in these various different fields, and then their desire for me, just kind of like curiosity, but also some sort of combination of ambition and entrepreneurial and interested in like taking risks and building new things, I think really brings some really interesting and cool people to the patent space, the IP space. Anyway, thanks for saying that. Um, let's see. We only have a little bit more time, but I want to ask you, was there anything about your time at Qualcomm that you wanted to share? And then also, I'd like to talk a little bit more about where you're at now and what you're getting up to.
Okay, yeah. Qualcomm was an amazing time. When I joined Qualcomm, at the time, there really was this there were the company had, I think, 7 or 8 patent attorneys, and they were all essentially supporting the corporate R&D function, that were immediately, things that were coming out of corporate R&D and was likely to get pushed into standards. They were essentially filing the next day on stuff like that. And it was an entire business unit of 4,000 engineers that were completely unsupported, and they were building the next generation chipsets.
Very cool.
So the standards are already coming out. Now you got to put the standards are defined, and now we got to build chips, because we got to try and sell those chips into the Samsungs and the LGs in order to prove the technology and build up CDMA. And so people are like, well, we have all this standards, essential patents. Why do we need to invest anything in non-standard essential patents? And then realize that that's probably not a good story. They were filing, but they were doing it kind of haphazardly, and the patent agent was very good, but he was supporting a 4,000 business unit. He was going to law school at night. That whole thing just didn't and it was working with like tons of outside counsel. There was no strategy behind it. There was no vision. So they hired me to kind of run that, and so immediately I tackled it, and I went from essentially what was initially just the chip part of it, to the baseband, to the mixed signal part, and then as we moved into as it evolved and we got more sophisticated in terms of the apps that went into the phone, and then it became a TV thing, and it became multimedia functionality, and then we have more sophisticated codecs. I kept moving around, and then inbound licensing. We had to inbound license a lot of the technology that was going to our product. So I got into licensing. And then at some point, there was a lot of litigation going on, so I wanted to support that litigation. So they allowed me to tackle and support the litigation, and they allowed me to go to Germany. So I was in Germany for a year, almost a
Cool.
year, and so I worked out of Munich and did some litigation support out of Munich, and was exposed to the whole EPO process, and sat on in the cancellation opposition proceedings and participated as an expert for Qualcomm, as a legal expert for Qualcomm. That was a lot of exciting things. But when I started, so I was like maybe a patent department of 10 people. When I left, it was over 200 some odd people.
Wow.
So to see that transition and the maturity of an organization that went from a couple of tens of millions of dollars in royalties per year to billions and billions of dollars in royalty by the time I left, and now I think it's close to maybe six plus $1 billion a
Wow.
year, and that's their major revenue generation. Even though they sell several billion chips, the margins of the chips are so small that, in comparison to the royalties, it pales in comparison to the royalties that come in from patents. So patents is still a core revenue generator for Qualcomm and companies like Nokia. I think possibly Ericsson as well, and there's others out there, obviously. And the Huawei's of the world are getting into the space. And that's why we're in a space like ours, we're concerned about, is Tesla really going to not monetize this portfolio that they have? Because they're saying they will, you know, does it make sense not to? Maybe, but you can't just trust that somebody will not monetize such a valuable asset,
Yeah.
because patents are money. They
When it
really
works,
are
it
money.
works
The
great.
bottom line. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry to cut you off there.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for diving into that. Cause yeah, I think that's, even just to be able to withstand the inevitable chaos of growth, of expansion at that rate is really, I think, so impressive. And also just the conversations that you've had and been on, I think is just, yeah, that speaks so highly to the piece about, just refinement of technical expertise and nuance that you can't just acquire, that really has to be acquired through experiences like that. Or I think that's maybe like a gold standard experience. But George, sorry to jump back into that briefly. Can you just explain at a high level standard essential patents for folks who don't know? Because we're talking standards and getting the technology into standards. And I think probably most of our peers know about that. But for folks who are a little more outside the IP space or the high tech IP space.
Yeah. So the best way to explain it, if you think back, can't really talk about VHS and beta because some of the younger folks probably will. So if you're developing today, someone of a software platform, and it has to. So if you're developing a system that's going to go in a vehicle, let's put it that way, and that vehicle, you're a supplier, and you have to provide an interface to that vehicle to another component that's sold by another supplier to, say, Volkswagen or BMW, right? You need to know what we all have to agree on the protocol, the signaling, okay, that's going to be from the various components, the various components being provided by the various suppliers, right? So how does that agreement happen? Right, there are standards organizations, either at the government level or at the private level, company by company level, that come together and establish standards. Okay, and so the incentive for these companies to come together and establish these standards is because they're the early adopters of the technology, and so they start patenting early in those space. So by pushing their patents into the standard and making commitments, they're going to license those patents on a fair and reasonable royalty. Okay, but they will license to anybody, meaning we're not going to join you. We're not going to hit you with a unfair license rate. None of that. We have committed to be fair. And if you challenge something as being unfair, we can take it to the courts, and the courts will decide whether our rates are fair or not. And so sometimes some of these standards have hundreds and hundreds of companies that participate. And so then they come together and potentially they have a legal monopoly to come together and license their patents to a particular standard collectively. And they're under a patenting entity. and that patenting entity then goes out and represents all the patent holders collectively, and then whatever revenues generated in terms of royalties, that revenue stream. So if one company A has 100 patents of X strength, then another company has 80 patents of Y strength, there's a formula there where they work out how they're going to share that revenue. And so that all works, good and, good. It works well until it doesn't, because there might be somebody out there that says, well, I don't want to take a license to any of your patents. Okay. In which case you have to say, okay, then I'm going to assert some of my non-essential patents on you, right? Like my antenna patents that are not part of my standard essential portfolio.
Because I
I
can't
have
sue on
not
those.
no, yeah, well, I've never agreed to fair and reasonable, so I can either try and enjoin you for putting an antenna on your phone or on your vehicle, or I can charge you whatever rate I want to charge you because I'm not committed to a fair rate on that. So you need a combination of both standard essential patents that you can license in a traditional way, coming together with others, which is traditionally the best way if there's a big enough pool, or the non-traditional, the non-essential patents, but they have to be litigation worthy. They have to be strength in terms of quality of the and broadness of the claims. And all of that, the combination of one or the other or both, it's the competitive strategy that a good, experienced IP attorney brings to the table.
Nice. Thank you so much for that. I didn't just put you on the spot with that, but I think that's something I really appreciate about you is your ability to take very complex matters and kind of distill them in a way that is understandable. And also, I wanted to highlight for a lot of folks who either don't work in the patent space or don't work in the licensing space. This is a completely different business model and something people don't really know about. I think that there's a sense that patent licensing is just the maybe one agreement that you would put together because some other company wants to borrow your technology, and I think that's actually that's possible, but it's actually a far more sophisticated business model than I'll let you use mine if you let me use yours
Right.
in a very
There's a lot of tricks to the
entirety of a
trade.
technology type of
Right.
yeah. There's a lot more nuance and a lot more complexity, and I think that you highlighted that well without getting into all of the details. So thank you for that. Um, let's see. We do need to wrap up here shortly, but wondering in terms of what you're doing now, is there anything one you'd like to share? And then I have one more question. I'm just going to let you talk. I feel that you have you've worked in these huge multinationals, highly sophisticated IP departments, and then been able to transition into either startups or companies going through, like a tech evolution. And I feel like you've been able to modulate your expertise in a way that's accessible across a variety of stakeholders, and also, like, of course, within big companies. And then I know you also were in Greece running your own firm and working with some startups there. Any advice to folks who are maybe feeling like pigeonholed in one area of the IP space and are interested in moving somewhere else? So maybe now this is somebody mid-career who's like, oh, I've just been like drafting the whole time, or I've been a portfolio manager, but I'd love to see more licensing, something like that. Something about that. And then also, I guess a piece on translation. How have you, or is it just part of your personality that you can like meet people where they're at with your wealth of expertise and knowledge and find the right level of complexity, I guess, to communicate to them? Sorry, those were three questions. So one, where you're at now. Two, mid-career person, how we're transitioning. And then three, how have you always been able to just modulate the complexity of your messaging to stakeholders? It feels like a translation almost.
Yeah. So on the first issue, what am I? Like I said, sorry, I'm at a company called International Motors. I'm the vehicle data guy, so to speak, supporting the autonomous vehicle portfolio in any way, from FTOs to the evolution of of the cluster. As all these things are coming together, they're getting clustered. Everything is becoming edge computing. Everything is becoming AI, agentic AI. All of that is all these technologies are coming in. So my role really is to try to figure it out and spot issues, and hopefully at the same time find ways to add value. That's what I'm doing today. It's exciting, very exciting. It has its challenges in terms of finding not enough hours in the day, but it is very exciting and I enjoy it very much.
Sweet.
The
And you're back
second
in
part of
Chicago,
I'm back in Chicago, yes.
which we're very glad about. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Uh, so the second part in terms of how people can transition, um, yeah, I think I kind of got into it a little earlier in terms of expanding to other areas, but uh, find ways to expand into areas that complement what you're doing.
Hmm.
Okay, AI. You can't be an AI. I mean, if you're CS double E, AI complements you very well, right? I mean, that's an area you can. If you're mechanical, most young mechanical, well, at least anybody in the last 20 years, has got a coding background.
Hmm.
And so you're already an electrical person. If you know how to code, so you already can easily get into AI and understand some of the principles of is a tenancy and residency and servers and all of that, and all the cross border export control issues that are tied into AI, and especially the privacy is a big one. So if you can understand all of that and you understand the underlying technology, okay, which if you're mechanical, electrical, CS, you will, that opens a whole industry for you, because that's where most of the jobs are.
Hmm.
They don't realize they need an IP prosecutor, but get in the door as an AI expert, as a privacy expert, and then impress upon them the importance that they need to be doing more to create value out of the portfolio in this technology space or that technology space. And I think that's a transition. And in terms of the third, yeah, modulating is difficult, definitely difficult, because uh, I always find it easier to talk to sales and marketing and engineering than I do my own colleagues.
Mhm.
Um, I think colleagues are resistant to learning from other colleagues.
Mm.
Uh, they non IP, non well,
Yeah.
no, even IP. I think there's a wall there
Mm.
that people always feel threatened that well, we're both lawyers. Why do you need to teach me anything? Um, and
Yeah.
so in the corporate world, there isn't too much. Everyone's expected to handle whatever task comes before them. And so the notion that I may not know something because I haven't been mentored or don't have the technical background, that some people are threatened by that. So whereas the salespeople that have had problems, they look at you like almost like you're a god. If you got an answer to their problem, you're
Mm.
their best friend. So that kind of relationship building where you're happy to help them, and they're happy to come to you because you're happy to help them, makes both an entrepreneurial and a very collegial environment.
Yeah.
The legal department sometimes is more competitive.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. And I would love to at least end my questions on that, because I think that's something that has struck me from fairly early on of working with you, is that you're one of the most, I think, intellectually open and generous persons that I've met in this industry. You have such a wealth of knowledge, which I keep saying, but like truly, and I've never once felt like condescended to. And I think that that's the reverse or the other side of the coin of being open and being curious and knowing that you're constantly learning, is also being accepting and inclusive of others who are also learning, but but are maybe 10 or 15 years behind, either chronologically or just in terms of like what we've learned. um so I'm so grateful for that, and I'm glad that we were able to, I guess, highlight a little bit of that and of your experiences. Um, and I'm wondering, yeah, of course, and thank you. And also, is there anything else that you wanted to share, you wanted to touch on before we wrap up this conversation?
Yeah, no, I look back on our time together and how fun it was, and there were days where um, it it wasn't so much fun because of the cultural
Mm. Yeah.
experience and the differences in cultural,
Yep.
and that is people should expect as we're becoming more cross Atlantic and trans tr- transcontinental in our business. Uh, the cultural differences between departments, between legal departments,
Yeah.
is vast.
Yeah.
Vast. The way people talk to each other, managers handle, and that is a whole different dimension to our job.
Yep.
That adds a whole different level of complexity that
Yeah.
people need to learn to navigate. Um, Me being from New York, you being from Minnesota, it was interesting how well we got along because you were so accepting to somebody that would tell you what you just did was stupid without being offended. And you're realizing, right? And then you could tell me the same thing because that's just a New Yorker thing, right? It's
Yeah.
just we don't meet it in a condescending way. It's just we meet it almost in an affectionate way, like
Mm.
right. But I had a displeasure of saying that to somebody in Sweden, and and you realize how that doesn't
Oh,
play over
that's
very
not
well.
really appropriate there. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly,
yeah.
exactly.
And
So when
so
I
it's a cultural thing. You meant it well. I mean, you meant it as in a playful meaning to build a bond with
yeah,
somebody, and
right.
and it's taken the wrong way, and that happens. And people will find things like that happen all the time in their career,
Yeah.
and you can change who you are.
Mm.
You can modulate it, okay, or you can just say, this isn't for me.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's such a balance that, I saw you, I guess, evolving, growing in from the outside. I don't know what was actually happening, of course, but I felt like that is, finding ways to continue to be yourself. Like, right, you said, like, you're a New Yorker who grew up in Greece. Like, and I took you're doing this completely wrong as, "Oh, this person respects me enough to, like, not skirt around the issue. They actually think that I can learn this and want to show me how to do it and like not waste my time. Like I know that if I go to George, he's going to tell me what's up. And instead of having to sit through 20 minutes um sidestepping the issue to me in my mind, but also realizing, right, when you're stepping into a new environment, bringing some cultural sensitivity, but like you said, without diluting it down where we're all just some like monoculture, then no one's bringing any sense of who they are. We're all just trying to um, get along at the expense of differing opinions. And I think that's something that's come up over and over on this podcast of um, finding ways to do that in a way that conveys respect and at the same time acknowledges that even if it's challenging, like a diversity of opinions is actually builds so much stronger of an environment. It's not just some political corporate speak or whatever. It's actually we want people to show up as themselves with their perspectives that they've earned through their lives.
That's not
Um,
to say the modulation is not important. You have to
right.
modulate your words and your actions, but don't get carried away and lose yourself in the process.
Exactly, exactly. Wonderful. And I think that is a perfect note to end this episode of Field Notes from Abroad on. George, thank you so much
Wonderful. Thank
again
you.
for making the time and, as always, being so generous with this wealth of information that you're carrying. Appreciate it.
Look forward to getting together soon.
Soon. I hope so.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Our lovely theme music is provided and composed by Damon Smile. Check them out wherever you get your music. Field Notes from Abroad is separate from my current role and reflects my views and the views of my guests only. It should not be construed as legal advice. You can connect with us on the socials at Field Notes from Abroad, and I'm always delighted to receive your ideas, feedback, or questions. And of course, if you like today's show, please leave the show a 5-star review wherever you're listening. This helps others find the show and connects them with ideas and conversations that may spur their professional development and curiosity. Thanks again for listening to Field Notes from Abroad. I'll see you on the next episode.